Brazilian city of Sao Paulo. The bride, wanting to surprise her groom and guests, decided to arrive at the wedding ceremony by helicopter. However, just a few minutes before the ceremony began, a terrible incident occurred that forever changed the fate of both newlyweds. Now you will see all this with your own eyes. Rosemere and Udirli met 3 years before the fateful day in 2013. However, it is worth mentioning that their love relationship only began 2 years later, in 2015. Rosemere was a nurse and Udirli worked as a locksmith. They both attended the same evangelical church, but they never really talked to each other. After a few exchanges of glances within the walls of the church and subsequent flirting, the couple went on their first date. About a year after they met, the young couple announced their engagement. Sometime later, they began planning their wedding. For Rosemere, marrying the man she loved was a real fairy tale dream. The girl had been planning her marriage for many years and had been saving money for one of the most important days of her life. The wedding ceremony for Rosemere was supposed to be just as she had imagined it. An important point of her dream was to arrive at the wedding ceremony by helicopter. Thus, descending from the heavens, she planned to surprise her future husband and all the invited guests. The bride was quite excited about her idea. This idea was known to a very limited circle of people. Her future husband was also in the dark. A couple of weeks before the wedding, Rosemere turned to a company specializing in providing services for renting light commercial helicopters. A 20-minute helicopter flight was valued at 1,800 Brazilian reais, which is approximately $400 US. So the wedding ceremony was scheduled for Sunday, December 4th, 2016. This day for the bride started early. At 7 a.m., the bride-to-be was already sitting in the beauty salon to take care of her hair and makeup. By 2 p.m., Rosemere was already dressed in a white wedding dress with a train, ready to go up to the altar. But the girl, as planned, went to a neighboring settlement from where the helicopter was supposed to take off. Before getting into the helicopter cabin, the bride decided to take time for a small photo session. In addition to Rosemere and the organizers of the celebration, 2 more people knew about the flight and accompanied her on the way. The bride's older brother, 40-year-old Silva, who was supposed to deliver his sister to the altar, as well as the wedding photographer Nayla Neves, who was in her 6th month of pregnancy. The Robinson R-44 helicopter, with 4 passengers on board, including the pilot, was supposed to take off around 3:30 p.m. and arrive at the specified place by 4 p.m. Meanwhile, at 3:30 p.m., the groom, Udirli Damasceno, put on a tie and headed to the altar. He thought that his bride was already there, as the wedding ceremony was supposed to start in just half an hour. But his assumptions were very far from the truth. So the time is about 3:30 p.m. and the weather is clear and sunny. All passengers, including the pilot, are in a good mood. Let's go to the wedding. The bride looks happy and her older brother too, but Silva is afraid to fly and only agreed to this for the sake of his sister. The pilot, Peterson Pinheiro, confidently holds the steering wheel. As we can see, the weather began to deteriorate along the route, with fog and drizzling rain ahead. The bride's brother is a little nervous. During the flight through the fog, the photographer was also nervous and asked the pilot several questions about the situation they found themselves in. It can be seen that the bride's brother continues to be nervous. Meanwhile, the weather conditions outside the aircraft have sharply deteriorated. From this moment on, the pilot practically does not see where he is flying. Despite all this, Rosemere looks absolutely calm. At one point, Rosemere's brother's nerves start to give out, but the girl herself continues to show composure and holds her brother's hand. There is heavy fog outside, and in such conditions, it becomes more difficult to control the rotorcraft. The photographer, Nayla Neves, is full of optimism and trusts the experienced pilot. But at one moment, something happens, and the helicopter begins to fall. Meanwhile, the guests at the wedding began to get bored outright. The bride was supposed to come there half an hour ago. At this moment, the pastor approached the groom and reported that the bride would fly in by helicopter, but due to bad weather, she would be late. The bride's delay is quite common at weddings. However, in this instance, the reasons for the tardiness were not at all related to the more usual problems at weddings. The situation began to take on an exciting character and began to worry the owner of the farm where the ceremony was held. Half an hour later, the farm owner called the groom aside for a conversation and said that the helicopter had crashed, but he had no more information. From what he heard, Uderli Damasceno was very upset. He hoped that everything was fine with his beloved. But a few minutes later, the farm owner again called the groom aside and reported that no one survived in the crash. The groom and all the guests were in a state of shock. The crash occurred just 2 miles from the ceremony site. The incident came to light when the helicopter did not land at a nearby soccer field as planned. Soon an investigation into this crash was launched. The main hypothesis of the investigative group was that the accident occurred due to cloudiness, rain, and fog. While trying to see something, the pilot descended too low. This led to the fact that at one moment, the helicopter hooked a tree with its tail and crashed. The crash occurred in a forest area a couple of 100 yards from the highway. This location made it difficult for rescuers and medics to operate. The fact is that they had to walk all this distance from the road to the scene of the incident on foot and lose precious minutes. Perhaps after the crash, someone miraculously managed to survive, but due to the inaccessibility of the place, he did not wait for help. A little later, the National Civil Aviation Agency reported that the helicopter was allowed to fly until February 1st, 2017. The capacity was up to 3 people, not counting the pilot. However, the helicopter did not have permission for charter flights. This means that passengers could not be transported on the helicopter. The pilot, Peterson Pinheiro, was considered a fairly experienced pilot. But it turned out that at the time of piloting, the man made several critical mistakes, including a loss of spatial orientation, and the fact that, in conditions of severe limited visibility, he began to descend too low to the ground. All responsibility for this incident lies